Hi, Chris. Great. So this is your question 155. So you talk about aquamarine. So aquamarine um, here again. The first question is about audit risks. Well, we'll mark that in again, and hopefully this because you can see a repeat here, your answer starts getting better. Um, Big issues here. Continuous production. So WIP in order to improve the manufacturing process. So generally, I guess the first question is how do they arrive? What's the process? And the risk that this is, of course, overstated, if you like, and just understanding the process as to how they arrive. So that's the risk here with this question of WIP. Um, and then, of course, it says they place this order, and 1/3 of this arrives in May, with the remainder expected to arrive. So the argument here is we want to make sure that this is not that the whole this 720 does not all exist on in our fixed asset register because it hasn't quite arrived in-house, if you like. We've placed an order, but it hasn't quite arrived. Expected to arrive later. So that's kind of an issue here. This question is one of a patent. I've been talking lately about intangibles. So the argument here is that we bought the patent, which is good. And so we borrowed this. So you start seeing this question about borrowing. This is important. So yes, we recognize this about classification. Has this been classified and disclosed? And of course, in terms of it probably will last for 5 years. You can see that's kind of the issue here. You have this patent to the right to manufacture, almost like a copyright or a license, if you like, almost. So we intend to see we should be looking to see that an amortization over 5 years of 1.3 divided by 5, if you like. That's what we're hoping to see, and we will calculate it, if you like, and actually see that. Make sure this is in the this is recorded at 1.3. The loan is always really important. We want to make sure that this has been classified correctly. It is disclosed of. So those are the issues here. And when I say classified, between the current and the non-current element. And then we also want to make sure the interest is recorded. So I'll talk about that. You'll see that as we go along, the interest has been recorded relating to it in the income statement correctly. And we want to look for any breaches of that interest, if you like, so that we know where we're going straight away with that. Then they outsource, so issues here. We don't have control over that. If you remember, I talked about internal controls, type 1, type 2 reports, where we can speak to the internal auditors of the actual payroll people to see if they can send us evidence of controls or good controls of their client. Therefore, we can then rely on their document because we can sort of say, yes, because they have good controls, we expect that they're handling the payroll. But again, it depends on how material this is. This question of evaluation, again, the question is that maybe we need to bring in an expert. The key point is that that's issue here. So again, we'll see if they have any incentive to manipulate the figures. But we can see issues here, receivables, and again, trade receivable testing, after date cash testing, the same thing we talked about. And then I think I mentioned this, if you're going to make people redundant after the year end, no decision has been made, well, you cannot provide for it. We want to make sure no provision occurs for that. So let's jump and see what you've said. So again, like I said, sorry for all the, I mark this and then I make the video. So yes, again, I was happy with this. Let's make this red. Yes, good. Yeah, and again, I think what you want to do here is that I think you'll be the risk that will not be detected because there are issues built. So no, I think I've highlighted what's really happening. So inherent risk pretty much is just the risk of material misstatement due to the nature of the industry, but we're talking and other things not related to control. So non-control related risks, if you like, anything else that could affect this industry, that could affect this organization. So typically external issues and the nature of its business. We can go on with those different examples. We'll see the answers in a second. So I think, so that's kind of your process. Control risk you always get right. The argument is internal control has not been able to remember, detect, or prevent. errors from happening. And detection risk, you always get right. It's just really due to our incompetence, if you like. So that's that. Then you talk about the risks, and I think yes, you're getting closer here. Yes, this is more delivered in two periods. Very good. So you want to be clear again. Yes, you do. You say overvalued. That's fine, but go for overstated, understated. We'll look at the answers. And yes, good. You're here. So you want to be really saying that only you want to make sure that only the non-current assets that have been delivered show in the non-current asset register. You want to highlight that. If you like, we'll look at the answers. The loan, yes. So this is very open, but again, your answer will improve. Yes. So here the risk is that the loan, if you like, has not been classified. Well, I guess you could even start from the very beginning, that it's not been recorded. One, two, not been classified between the current and the non-current aspect. Two, three, it's not been disclosed of. And we extended, of course, that argument into the interest. So good. So this is the first level, but again, like I say, you'll get better at that. Redundancy may not necessarily represent going concern. They might just be restructuring, but the key point is that we can at best disclose of it. We can't put through a provision because you haven't highlighted it or mentioned it at the year end. That's the key point. Yes, you can't suddenly wake up and go back and put a provision. You must have told everyone. You can see the argument there. So land and buildings could be, yes, exactly. This is true. Good. So you want to end this statement by saying, therefore, oh yeah, you do. You talk about overvalued, or yes, it could be overstated, and be again like just give the actual detail of what's going on. Good. This is the right answer, and review the process and looking at the if you need external, you probably will need, well, if you do need external, or look at the documents by the experts who have carried out the revaluation. It must be objective. It must be objective. Okay, receivables have increased significantly, which may negatively affect cash flows. Yes, again, so there's a risk that yes, receivables are overstated. So you can see my language all the time. I'm trying to hit the discussion about overstatement and understated. And then payroll. The fact here is that you don't have direct access. That's the risk to that figure. So you really can't be sure about the accuracy, the completeness, if you like, and the controls over the process, which is what you sort of talk about. So let's look at their answers. Let's go straight into the answers and see where they're going with this. Again, that you can see them break up audit risk into two: risk of material misstatement, detection risk. So it says only as you write this, you'll get better at it. And inherent risk is and they again define that this issue of this is you now really nailing it. There's this the fact that one of those three things, the income statement, class of transaction, account balance statement, or disclosure, could be material, before thinking of any controls. So really just the risk that it could be due to anything else. We have control and detection risk, which we talk about regularly. So where are we going? Um, so the fact here is that if you have work happening continuously, you want to make sure it's about cutoff, really, isn't it? That WIP is in the right period at the year end. Excuse me. The WIP is in the right period. We need to assess that. So inventory might be under or overstated. So you just want to understand, assess the cutoff of work in progress at the year end, and whether or not an independent expert is needed. So that's always a good one to bring in. Always the independent expert. I think you mentioned this. Good. Only assets which physically exist at the year end should be included in PPE. So that's the kind of issue. So you can obtain a breakdown of assets at the year end to make sure. Then we have this question of the patent. Patent 1.3 million. Intangible amortized over 5 years. So agree the documentation and recalculate to make sure that this is being recorded, if you like, through the books. They borrowed 1.2 million via 5-year loan, and again I talk about this question of splitting it, right? And this question of, so this is a big point, right? Big point. So you need to confirm that, like you said, and also this split between current. You must always remember this, right? And then of course you mentioned this details of security confirmed to the bank letter. Again, this question of, of course, again, like I talked about, this question of finance costs, again, need to be considered. Consider your finance costs. Interest payments agreed, and it's paid. And again, like I say, the risk is if it's not been done, then we have a potential. I doubt it though. In this case, a potential breach, and therefore all non-current aspects of the loan might turn current. Outsourcing its payroll detection risk. Complete to confirm completeness and accuracy over payroll. So here we are discussed with management the extent of records, any monitoring. Again, consideration should be given to contacting the service organization's auditors to confirm the level of control. So since we can't be there, we want to try and get as much information as we can. Right. So then we have. Right. So in terms of any transfer, we have potential errors and completeness. So that's the issue here. So we would just want to understand the transfer. We want to audit the transfer journals, if you like, and the effectiveness of those transfer controls. Really, that's where we want to. That's what we want to do. Again, this question of revaluation. So again, revaluation, receivables. Land and military value, discuss and look for, like you've written there, evaluation undertaken by an expert. You talk about that. Receivables, trade receivables, anything. Extended post-year cash date. So that's the same principle there. Um, the 65 years, the timing has not been confirmed. You can see here if it is announced, but I think they tell us it's not announced. I don't remember. I'm sure I saw it's not been announced. If it had been announced before the year end, then we would have put a provision, but it's not been. So I think that all you need to do is just make a what's the term? Disclose. So I guess this is talking about how we're going to get that information from these payroll services. This is a good question for when you have outsourced a product. Sorry, yeah, well, a service. And you can see here it says that in terms of you want to understand the business, of course, what they're doing, and what the design and control implementation are over internal controls. But let's just be practical. It says you may wish to visit and undertake tests of controls, really, because again, we want to see we want to be able to rely on controls. Then if it's not possible, you can contact the auditors to get a type 1 report. Remembering this is important. It really does separate your work in terms of your understanding of how internal controls work and outsourcing. A type 1 report or a type 2 report. So type 2 report is much stronger, operating effectiveness, if you like, in addition to the description and design. We're literally saying to the auditor, the audit company for the payroll people that listen, tell us about their internal controls. If they can give you this report, then you can then sort of rely on it. And I mean, you're ultimately responsible. So therefore, no reference may be made in the auditor's report regarding the use of information from the choral auditors. You're ultimately responsible for getting this information. So you just need to kind of find a way to bully your way into the payroll people's organization to ensure that their controls are good. So that's that. I think that's that. That's a good question 155. I'm not sure if I scored. Aha, I think I gave you 6 out of 12 here. I think I would have given you I would have deducted 1 or 2 here, maybe deducted 2 in the process here. And let's look at your own views here at the end. I gave you 1 out of 3. The payrolls and external select ultimate. Yes, this should be considered and discussed to make sure. Yes, I think so. But you can see that you had to do a bit more, given the question. You just had to explain the additional consider for 3 marks. Um, the additional factors. You're ultimately responsible. You might have to send someone in there. The type 1 and type 2 report take you into probably 2-mark territory straight away if you mention that. Okay, great stuff. See you in the next question.